October 23rd, 1944, 2:47 p.m. Solomon Sea, 140 miles northeast of Papua New Guinea, Lieutenant Thomas Dutch Kellerman's P-38. Lightning shuddered as he banked hard, watching his compass needle spin like a broken clock hand, fuel gauge showing 43 minutes remaining. Radio dead since the lightning strike 20 minutes ago, and somewhere below the cloud layer at 800 feet. The entire Pacific Ocean waited to swallow him whole. The 23-year-old from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, had exactly one choice: trust the broken compass pointing northwest, or ignore it and guess his way home to base at Oro Bay. Either way, he was probably dead. Before we continue with Dutch Kellerman's incredible story, we need your help to keep these forgotten heroes alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and innovation from World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your country, your city. We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Are you a veteran? Did your grandfather serve? Do you have a connection to this war? We want to hear from you. Now, back to October 23rd, 1944, where Dutch Kellerman was about to make a decision that would change everything. Dutch came from a family of Iowa farmers who'd never seen an ocean before Pearl Harbor. His father ran a John Deere repair shop on Highway 30, and Dutch had spent his teenage years elbow-deep in tractor engines, learning that mechanical problems usually had simple causes: a stuck valve, a loose connection, something obvious everyone else overlooked. He'd enlisted 3 days after his 19th birthday, in January 1942, lying about a childhood bout of scarlet fever that should have disqualified him. The Army Air Forces needed pilots desperately enough not to look too closely at medical records from small-town doctors. By July 1943, Dutch had earned his wings at Luke Field in Arizona. Barely 5'7", 140 pounds soaking wet, so short he needed a cushion to see properly over the instrument panel. His squadron, the 475th Fighter Group, Satan's Angels, arrived in New Guinea in August 1943. Their job? Escort bombers, strafe Japanese positions, and somehow survive the most hostile flying environment in the war. The heat, the storms, the mechanical failures that killed you before the enemy ever got a chance. Between August 1943 and October 1944, the 475th lost 47 pilots, not to combat, to navigation errors. The Coral Sea and Solomon Sea looked identical from altitude. Endless blue, occasional islands that all looked the same, cloud formations that obscured landmarks. Radio navigation beacons helped when they worked, but tropical storms knocked out electronics, lightning fried radio systems, and compasses, subjected to the violent maneuvers of dogfighting, developed errors that sent pilots hundreds of miles off course. The ocean didn't care about your training. It didn't matter if you'd shot down 5 enemy planes, run out of fuel over water, and you had maybe 4 minutes before hypothermia began shutting down your body. The warm water was a lie, 94 degrees at the surface, but it pulled heat from your core relentlessly. Search and rescue found bodies days later, floating in life vests, dead from exposure in tropical waters. Lieutenant Robert Bobby Chen was Dutch's wingman, best friend, and partner in a pact they'd made over warm beer in Port Moresby. After the war, they'd open a flight school in California. Chen and Kellerman Aviation, 50-50 partners. They'd shaken hands on it September 4th, 1944, the night before a routine patrol mission. Chen never came back from that mission. His last radio transmission crackling with static. "Compass is acting funny. Heading looks wrong. I'm going to..." Then silence. They found Chen's P-38 3 weeks later, belly up in shallow water off Goodenough Island, 60 miles from where he should have been. The compass had failed. He'd flown in circles, burning fuel until his engines quit. The impact killed him instantly. Small mercy given the alternative. Dutch attended the memorial service at the base chapel, a crude wooden structure that smelled of mildew and aviation fuel. 26 years old. Chen had been 26 years old. His parents owned a grocery store in Sacramento. They'd never see their son again. Never know exactly what happened, never understand that a simple mechanical failure had stolen their future. Dutch made a promise that day, standing in the tropical heat while the chaplain read from a worn Bible. He'd figure out what was wrong with those compasses. The problem wasn't the compasses themselves. The Army Air Forces used Type B6 magnetic compasses, reliable instruments that had worked fine in European and American airspace. The problem wasn't pilot error. These were experienced aviators who'd flown hundreds of hours. The problem was the Pacific theater itself. Dutch started asking questions nobody else bothered with. Why did compass errors happen more frequently after combat? Why did the failures cluster in certain areas? Why did the needles sometimes spin wildly before settling on wrong headings? He spent his off-duty hours in the maintenance tents, talking to crew chiefs who just shrugged. "Compasses go bad, Lieutenant. We replace them when we can get parts. Sometimes takes 3 weeks." Meanwhile, pilots kept dying. Dutch noticed something else. The errors got worse after pilots fired their guns. The P-38's nose housed 4 50-caliber machine guns and one 20mm cannon. Massive weapons that generated tremendous recoil and vibration, and right behind those guns, mounted on the instrument panel, sat the magnetic compass. Every time a pilot fired a burst, the entire nose of the aircraft shook violently. On October 12, 1944, Dutch pulled a compass from a damaged P-38 waiting for repair. He took it to his quarters, a tent he shared with 3 other pilots, and disassembled it carefully by flashlight. The brass housing, the alcohol-filled chamber, the magnetized needle balanced on a pivot point. There, a hairline crack in the pivot jewel, barely visible even with a magnifying glass borrowed from the base doctor. The crack let the needle wobble off its magnetic axis, not enough to notice on the ground. But in flight, especially after the vibration of gunfire, the needle would drift. 5 degrees, 10 degrees, 15 degrees off true heading. Fly 15 degrees off course for an hour, you'd miss your base by 40 miles. In the Pacific, 40 miles meant the difference between landing safely and ditching in the ocean. Dutch tested his theory. He mounted the cracked compass in a vise and tapped the housing sharply with a wrench, simulating gunfire vibration. The needle spun wildly, then settled, pointing northeast, when true north was actually northwest. A 30-degree error, more than enough to kill you. He checked 6 more compasses from aircraft that had recently seen combat. 4 had similar microscopic cracks. The vibration from firing the guns was literally breaking the compasses, so slowly nobody noticed until pilots were already lost. Dutch drafted a report for the squadron commander, Major Harrison, explaining the problem. Technical language, photographs, recommendations. He delivered it October 15, 1944. Major Harrison read it, nodded politely, and filed it away. "We'll send it up the chain of command, Lieutenant. These things take time. Meanwhile, fly careful." 3 more pilots disappeared the following week. Dutch couldn't wait for the chain of command. On October 21st, 2 days before his own fateful flight, he did something that could have gotten him court-martialed. He modified his own compass without authorization. He worked alone in the maintenance hangar at 2 a.m. when the night crew was on break. The modification was simple, almost crude. He fabricated a small shock-absorbing mount from rubber gasket material and thin aluminum sheet metal, materials scrounged from damaged aircraft. The mount isolated the compass housing from direct contact with the instrument panel, dampening the vibration from gunfire. The whole process took 47 minutes, cutting the rubber precisely, bending the aluminum brackets, remounting the compass so it appeared unchanged to casual inspection, testing it by slamming his fist against the panel. The needle barely quivered. If it failed, if the modification somehow made things worse, Dutch would face a board of inquiry. Unauthorized modification of critical flight instruments violated at least 3 regulations he could think of. But Chen was dead. 3 more pilots had vanished. The official channels moved like molasses while men died. Dutch flew a test mission October 22nd. A short patrol, nothing eventful. He fired several bursts at a practice target on the water. The compass held steady. Perfect. He felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he'd found something. The next day, October 23rd, Dutch was assigned to escort a B-25 Mitchell bomber on a reconnaissance run over suspected Japanese shipping lanes near New Britain. Routine mission, 4-hour round trip. The weather forecast called for scattered thunderstorms, normal for the season. They hit the storm at 1:30 p.m. A towering thunderhead that rose to 35,000 feet, dark as charcoal, flickering with internal lightning. The bomber pilot elected to fly around it, adding 30 minutes to the route. Dutch followed in formation, his P-38 bucking in the turbulence. At 2:23 p.m., lightning struck Dutch's left engine. The flash was blinding. The crack of thunder instantaneous and deafening, even through his leather helmet. The left Allison engine coughed, sputtered, kept running, barely, but the electrical system was fried. Radio dead. Intercom dead. Even the electric compass backup was out. Dutch had only the magnetic compass, his modified compass, and his instincts. The bomber disappeared into another cloud bank. Dutch tried to follow, but his damaged engine couldn't maintain formation speed. Within 5 minutes he was alone in a sky that looked the same in every direction. Grey clouds above, grey clouds below, grey ocean visible through gaps. He did the math. Fuel remaining, enough for maybe 90 minutes at economy cruise. Distance to base, approximately 140 miles, if he knew which direction base actually was. The storm had disoriented him completely. Dutch checked the compass. It pointed northwest, steady and confident. But was it right? Or was this another failure, just a different kind, about to send him to the same fate as Bobby Chen? Every instinct screamed at him to ignore it. The storm had pushed them south and east. He should fly north and west to compensate. The compass had to be wrong. Compasses always went wrong in storms. But Dutch remembered those 47 minutes at 2 a.m., fabricating shock mounts by flashlight. He remembered the steady needle during yesterday's test flight. He'd built this modification with his own hands. Either he trusted his work, or he didn't. He trusted it. Dutch banked the P-38 northwest, following the compass heading exactly, and dropped down through the clouds to 400 feet to get below the weather. The altimeter unwound slowly as he descended. At 3,800 feet, he broke through into clear air, and saw spread out below him like toys in a bathtub, a Japanese convoy. 12 ships, 3 destroyers, 6 transports, 3 cargo vessels, steaming northeast in a perfect formation, no air cover visible. They were supposed to be 200 miles from this location, according to the last intelligence briefing. But here they were, caught in the open, utterly exposed. Dutch's heart hammered. His fuel situation was desperate, maybe 70 minutes remaining. His left engine was damaged and unreliable. His radio was dead, so he couldn't call for help. And he was one pilot facing an entire convoy that probably had hundreds of anti-aircraft guns. The smart play: fly around them, conserve fuel, try to get home, report the position later. Dutch armed his guns. He'd found them by accident, by trusting a modification nobody had authorized, by following a compass everyone else would have ignored. Bobby Chen had died because his compass failed. This convoy was carrying supplies and reinforcements to kill more American soldiers, and Dutch Kellerman from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, who'd learned in his father's tractor shop that mechanical problems had simple solutions, wasn't about to waste this opportunity. He climbed back into the clouds, gaining altitude and surprise. The convoy had no idea he was there. At 8,000 feet, he leveled off, took a deep breath, and rolled into a dive. The P-38 accelerated rapidly, the airframe shaking, the damaged left engine screaming its protest. Dutch aimed for the lead destroyer, a Fubuki-class vessel bristling with guns. His airspeed hit 400 miles per hour. The ship grew larger in his gun sight, every detail suddenly visible. Men on deck, the white water at the bow, the gun turrets tracking upward too slowly. At 2,000 feet, Dutch opened fire. The 450 caliber machine guns and 20mm cannons spoke simultaneously, a hammering roar that shook the entire aircraft. The shock-mounted compass vibrated but held steady, the needle unwavering. Red tracers arced down into the destroyer's superstructure. Metal sparked and shredded. Men scattered. Something exploded amidships, probably an ammunition locker. Dutch pulled up hard at 800 feet, so low he could see individual faces staring up at him. Anti-aircraft fire followed him, black puffs of flak stitching the sky behind his tail. He climbed back into the clouds at full throttle. His left engine belching dark smoke now, definitely dying. But he wasn't done. For the next 40 minutes, Dutch Kellerman conducted a one-man war against 12 ships. He'd dive from the clouds, fire a burst at a different vessel, pull up before the flak got him, disappear back into the weather. The convoy scattered, breaking formation, zigzagging desperately. Destroyers laid smoke screens. Transports tried to flee at maximum speed. Dutch hit 7 different ships. He couldn't sink them, his ammunition wasn't heavy enough, but he damaged them, set fires, created chaos. More importantly, he forced them to waste time and fuel on evasive maneuvers. Every minute they spent running from him was a minute they weren't delivering supplies to the enemy. His left engine finally quit completely at 3:31 p.m. His ammunition ran out at 3:35 p.m. His fuel gauge read 18 minutes remaining, and he still had no idea exactly where he was. The convoy was limping away behind him, scattered across 20 miles of ocean, trailing smoke and losing formation discipline. Dutch checked his compass one last time, still pointing steadily, still trustworthy. He turned for home, flying on one engine, and followed that northwest heading with absolute faith. 43 minutes later, with his fuel gauge on empty, with his good engine coughing as it sucked the last vapor from the tanks, Dutch Kellerman saw the coastline of Papua New Guinea. And there, exactly where it should be, Oro Bay Airfield. He landed with the engine dying on final approach, rolling to a stop with not enough fuel left to taxi to the parking area. The ground crew had to tow his P-38 the last 100 yards. Dutch climbed out of the cockpit on shaking legs, his flight suit soaked with sweat, his hands trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. His crew chief, Master Sergeant Roy Preston from Tennessee, stared at the smoking left engine, the empty ammunition bays, the scorch marks from near-miss flak. "Lieutenant, where the hell have you been?" Dutch pointed at the compass on the instrument panel. "Tell you later, but that shock mount I installed, it works." Preston looked closer at the rubber-mounted compass, then at Dutch's face, then back at the compass. "You modified this when?" "2 nights ago, don't tell anyone yet." But word got around anyway. The way things always did on military bases. The bomber crew had made it back safely and reported the storm, the lightning strike, the lost fighter escort. Everyone assumed Dutch was dead or ditched in the ocean. Then he showed up, alive, with empty guns and wild stories about finding a Japanese convoy. The next morning, a reconnaissance flight confirmed it. 12 Japanese ships scattered and damaged in the exact location Dutch described, more than 200 miles from their expected route. 3 cargo vessels so badly damaged they'd been abandoned and scuttled by their own crews. The convoy's schedule disrupted by at least a week, maybe more. Intelligence officers questioned Dutch for 3 hours. How did he find them? How did he navigate back with a dead radio and damaged engine? How did he maintain accurate heading through clouds with no visibility? Dutch showed them the shock-mounted compass, explained the vibration theory, demonstrated how standard compasses wobbled after simulated gunfire, while his modifications stayed stable. The intelligence officers looked at each other, shrugged, and filed their reports. Within a week, 7 other pilots in the squadron had asked Dutch to install the same modification on their aircraft. He worked late nights, fabricating rubber shock mounts from salvaged materials, installing them quietly, telling pilots to keep it unofficial until the Army approved it. By November 1944, 23 P-38s in the 475th Fighter Group had modified compasses. Navigation errors dropped from approximately 1 incident per 40 flight hours to 1 incident per 300 flight hours. No more pilots lost to wandering off course. Dutch's old wingman position was filled by Lieutenant James Porter, a 24-year-old from Atlanta who'd arrived in October. Porter flew with Dutch on November 8, 1944, during an escort mission over the Bismarck Sea. They hit weather, lost visibility, and Porter's standard compass started spinning. "Dutch, my compass is going crazy. I don't know which way is home." Dutch checked his own shock-mounted compass, steady as ever. "Follow me. Stay on my wing. I know where we're going." They made it back without incident. Porter landed, climbed out of his cockpit, and found Dutch in the operations tent. "That compass modification of yours just saved my life. I'm getting one installed tonight." Word spread beyond the 475th Fighter Group. By December 1944, pilots in 3 other squadrons had heard about Kellerman's shock mount and wanted the modification. Dutch wrote detailed instructions, drew diagrams, and distributed them through informal channels. Maintenance crews fabricated the mounts from scrap materials. The Army Air Force's brass finally noticed in January 1945 when navigation incident reports started showing statistical improvement across multiple squadrons in the Southwest Pacific Theater. An investigating team arrived at Oro Bay, questioned Dutch, examined his modification, and filed an official report. The response came March 1945. Unauthorized modifications to flight instruments were violations of regulations. Dutch received an official reprimand in his service record. The shock mount design was confiscated for evaluation by proper engineering channels. No court-martial, at least. Just a note in his file that he'd modified equipment without authorization. The reprimand would probably hurt his chances for promotion. But Dutch didn't care about promotions. He cared that no more pilots were dying because their compasses lied to them. 6 months later, July 1945, the Army Air Forces issued Technical Order 01-46-44. Installation of vibration dampening mounts for Type B6 magnetic compasses. The official modification used injection-molded rubber bushings and aluminum brackets, essentially identical to Dutch's crude fabrication from October 1944, but manufactured properly and approved through channels. The technical order didn't mention Dutch Kellerman's name. The credit went to the engineering division at Wright Field, Ohio, who'd developed the modification. The fact that their design was identical to something a 23-year-old lieutenant had cobbled together with scrap rubber and a borrowed flashlight was never acknowledged in official documents. By August 1945, when the war ended, approximately 800 Army Air Forces aircraft in the Pacific Theater had been retrofitted with the vibration dampening mounts. Estimated navigation errors prevented. Over 200. Estimated lives saved. Between 40 and 80 pilots and aircrew. Dutch Kellerman never received a medal for the convoy attack. Single pilot strikes against naval targets weren't considered significant enough for valor awards, especially since he hadn't sunk any ships. He received credit for 7 ships damaged, added to his record, noted in squadron reports, forgotten by everyone except the men who'd been there. He never received recognition for the compass modification either. The reprimand in his file stood. Dutch mustered out of the Army Air Forces in November 1945, returning to Cedar Rapids with captain's bars, an air medal with 3 oak leaf clusters, and no interest in talking about the war. His father's John Deere shop needed help. Farm equipment had been neglected during the war years, and tractors across Iowa were breaking down. He married Dorothy Jenkins, a nurse he'd met during a war bond rally in 1943, in March 1946. They had 3 daughters, Susan, Jennifer, and Patricia. Dutch worked in the family shop, fixing tractors, never mentioning that he'd once flown a fighter plane on one engine across the Pacific Ocean, following a compass he'd modified with rubber gasket material and hope. Bobby Chen's parents in Sacramento never learned about the shock mount modification. They never knew their son's death had sparked an innovation that saved dozens of other families from the same grief. The official casualty report listed Chen's death as aircraft accident due to navigation error. Nothing about compass failure, nothing about fixable mechanical problems. Dutch attended one squadron reunion in 1967 at a hotel in San Diego, 22 years after the war. Old men now, most of them, with gray hair and grandchildren. They drank beer, told stories, and remembered the guys who hadn't come home. Lieutenant James Porter, the pilot from Atlanta, whose life Dutch had saved in November 1944, sought him out specifically. "Dutch, I never properly thanked you. That day over the Bismarck Sea when my compass went crazy, I would have flown in circles until I ran out of gas. You got me home." Dutch shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude. "You would have figured it out." "No, I wouldn't have. And neither would the 30 other guys who got that modification installed. We all owed you." Dutch changed the subject, talked about tractors, corn prices, anything but the war. He died March 17, 1993, at age 71 in a Cedar Rapids hospital from complications of emphysema. The local newspaper ran a brief obituary, Thomas Kellerman, local businessman and World War II veteran, passed away Tuesday. He is survived by his wife Dorothy, 3 daughters and 7 grandchildren. Services Friday at St. Patrick's Church. Nothing about the convoy, nothing about the compass, nothing about saving lives with scrap rubber and midnight ingenuity. In 1998, a military historian named Dr. Patricia Hornsby was researching navigation accidents in the Pacific Theater for a book on aviation safety. She found the March 1945 technical order about compass vibration dampening, cross-referenced the squadron reports from late 1944, and noticed the sudden statistical improvement in the 475th Fighter Group. She tracked down James Porter, still alive at age 78, in Atlanta. He told her about Dutch Kellerman and the shock mounts. She found Roy Preston, the old crew chief in Nashville. He still had the original diagrams Dutch had drawn in 1944, kept in a shoebox with other war memorabilia. Dr. Hornsby published her findings in 2001. The Kellerman modification, unauthorized innovation and the reduction of navigation casualties in the SWPA, 1944-1945. The paper appeared in a small academic journal that most people never read, but some people did. In 2003, the National Museum of the United States Air Force contacted Dorothy Kellerman, then 82 years old, living alone in Cedar Rapids. They wanted to add Dutch's story to their Pacific Theater exhibit. They wanted the original shock mount assembly if she had it. She didn't. Dutch had thrown away most of his war souvenirs years ago. The only thing she found was his old flight log, water-stained and fading, with one entry circled in pencil. October 23, 1944. Lightning strike. Damaged engine. Found enemy convoy. Made it home on compass and prayer. The museum accepted the flight log and created a small display, a photograph of Dutch in his flight suit, a replica P-38 compass with a shock mount assembly, and a brief description of the modification that saved lives. The display measures 3 feet wide, tucked between exhibits about the B-29 and the atomic bomb. Most visitors walk past it without noticing. Every year, a few hundred people stop and read the plaque. Some of them are veterans, some are engineering students, some are pilots who recognize the genius of a simple solution to a deadly problem. They read about a 23-year-old from Iowa who spent 47 minutes in a maintenance hangar at 2 a.m. working with borrowed tools and scrap materials because he'd promised a dead friend that no more pilots would die the way Bobby Chen had died. They read about an unauthorized modification that violated regulations, earned its creator a reprimand, and saved approximately 40 to 80 lives. They read about a man who received no medal, no official recognition, no credit in the technical order that bore his innovation. A man who went home to fix tractors, raised 3 daughters, and died quietly in a hospital bed, never talking about the war. If this story moved you, if you believe these forgotten heroes deserve to be remembered, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel so these stories keep reaching people. And please, drop a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from, tell us if you served or if someone in your family did. Tell us what you think about Dutch Kellerman and the men like him who saved lives with ingenuity and courage. Because sometimes the real heroes aren't the ones who got the medals. They're the ones who saw a problem, found a solution, and did the right thing even when nobody was watching. Thank you for keeping their memory alive. Historical note. This story is a fictionalized account inspired by real navigation challenges faced by Allied pilots in the Pacific Theater during World War II. While specific characters and events are dramatized, the core issues, compass failures due to vibration, unauthorized field modifications by pilots and crew, and informal innovation saving lives, are well-documented aspects of the air war in the Southwest Pacific area.